being the CIO for Satya as he's doing the transformation at Microsoft sounds a lot more impressive than it felt. I felt like I was thrown into this role, and he was going, 100 miles an hour, and I was being drug along, and had all kinds of ideas that I thought were brilliant, and most of them weren't working. But we were learning from that and trying to go. So really the perspective that I talk from is more from, we tried a bunch of things, had some ideas of what worked, and the ones that didn't work, we learned why and retried, and eventually figured out a bunch of things to help our transformation. But I expect that everybody here is going through some sort of a transformation, and that really, learning from others is the thing. Learning from the failures that we made and how to make those better are what helps us go faster in today's society. In fact, the great philosopher Yoda said in the last Star Wars movie, he said, "The greatest teacher failure is." And I would say that you don't always have to do the failing yourselves, that you can learn from others, and that's why we have forums like this and why we share with each other. So I hope that I can do at least a reasonable job of going through some of the lessons that we learned as we tried to drive this transformation. Let me do a quick story, and then I'll explain what I'm going to present. One of the fun things that I've been able to do since I retired was teach a class at my son's school, 14 to 17-year-olds. And one of the fun things about teaching students is that they're not stuck in how things have always worked. So they've open minds, and they're looking at all the changes. And we did some exercises just on the pace of change. And they actually were able to, with data, prove that everything is accelerating, that the pace of change is getting faster and faster. And I know we feel that, but they used data. They looked at things like the Gartner hype curve over time, and showing that technologies are accelerating faster and faster. And they looked at the trends with companies and who was disrupting who, and how that was changing, to kind of prove with some data that things are going faster and faster. One of the exercises that I did with them, because they actually don't know a world that isn't all technology and going as fast as it is today. So we did this exercise where we looked at, what was the world like, 10, 20 years ago, in order to try to see if everything's accelerating, what's it going to look like 5 to 10 years out. So 10 years ago today, the iPhone hadn't been released yet. There were no app stores of any kind. And think about how much has changed in just 10 years with all of what we rely on, the phone apps today. I also pulled out for them a memo that Bill Gates had written to senior Microsoft people just over 20 years ago, called the Internet Tidal Wave. And I read a bit of the memo to the students, and this is just over 20 years ago, and Bill, writing to the execs at Microsoft, says, "There's this thing I want you to all try called the internet." And he pointed to some sites that we should go look at. There was a site where you could actually search things called Yahoo. And he said there's several companies are starting to advertise how they do their products, and he listed some to look at: Lotus and Netscape and Sun, all of which don't even exist anymore. But this was just 20 years ago, just a little over 20 years ago. So think, if everything is accelerating, and that's what we've had, that much change in the last 10 to 20 years, what's it going to be like just 5 to 10 years from now? Are we going to have something like the app store that has an app for everything for artificial intelligence? There's some marketplaces today where you can go find fully trained models for some capabilities, but maybe we'll have everything that you need will already be a trained model that you can just pull down from a AI store and use that in pulling things away. And that's something that easily could be 5 years from now. But if things are going to change this much, what do we have to do to help our teams today be ready for that amount of change and to be ready to push forward? So really, most of the lessons that I learned were about the people and how to bring the people along and how do we go faster. And I'm going to go through some of those. I'm going to not try to do the 100 lessons, but I'll summarize a few that I think are relevant. 2 quick setup slides, and then I'll get into some lessons. This was a slide from the World Economic Forum in January 2016, where all the leaders in the world, business and government, get together in Davos, Switzerland. And they declared that we were now in the internet, or the Industrial Revolution 4.0. And it looked kind of like 3.0 to me at first, so I was trying to figure out what is it that's made them think that we're in 4.0. And there were 2 things. One was this pace of change that I've been talking about, and the second was the level of disruption that's happening, where whole industries are being completely taken over. Things like, what's the largest hotel in the world now based on rooms? Airbnb. Completely disrupting that industry. And if you look industry by industry, there are complete disruptions that are happening in the industry. This slide, MIT in Boston used some data to try to plot the companies that were really going after digitization from a customer perspective, this digital intensity on the vertical axis, and that were really looking at disrupting within their industry on the horizontal axis. And they found that the ones that were doing that actually were driving the biggest growth in revenue, profitability, market share. And it's really important to think of all of these things. And the companies that weren't are the ones that are being left behind, and they're actually negatives in a lot of the categories. So it's important for us to think about how can we go faster. So what do we have to change in our teams so that we can go faster? These were the things that I was trying to push, and I just wasn't getting traction until I started figuring some things out. So just 4 things, 4 buckets, I should say, categories. Go through them quickly with why I picked these 4, and then I'm going to go back through and talk about how to do each one. So the first thing there it goes, it is culture. And you've probably heard the saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. What I found when I was trying to get my team to go is that I was having the same thing that Satya was trying to do with all of Microsoft, and reset the culture so that it was something that supported driving that change at the pace that we needed to. Because what happens when the culture, what's normal in your company, kind of resists change or isn't is very risk averse. Anytime you try to push change, the culture's going to pull it back and hold you back and keep you from making progress. So I'll talk about how we actually change the culture for our teams to go forward. We have to, if we're going to go fast, we got to make sure we're going in the right direction. The historic metrics that we use to define success in IT don't work anymore. They're fine metrics to make sure we're being efficient, but things like deliver on time, on budget, on scope to what we're asked for, the high availability, cost efficiency, those are things that was success for IT historically. And again, we don't throw them away. They're still important to look at, but they are not success. Success is actually having the business transform. And you have to look at getting those business metrics in place and rewarding your teams and having everybody in the company look at those same measures of success. So we don't when we release a major update, we don't celebrate success anymore. When the results of that release push the business metrics, that's when we celebrate. So we've got to change that view of what success is, and I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. We have to modernize how we work, and this is the whole Agile framework that we push on, but it's not just for software development or IT projects. It's how we run the whole companies. I was talking to a CEO of a big bank in Australia 2 weeks ago and kind of going through some of these points, and he stopped and he said, "Oh, I'm trying to get my whole organization to be agile, but when I have a meeting, it's still this planned out thing with structured agendas." And he said, I'm not being a good example, am I? And it was like, yes, he's getting it. We have to change how we work so that we can work at this new pace. And then there's a bunch of things that cause friction, and I'll go through some examples, but I would say this point is really looking at everything that is creating friction and slowing you down and attacking them and fixing them. So I'll go through some examples of that. But let me go back to how do we set culture? And the word purposefully is there on purpose. What Satya did to reset the culture in Microsoft was look at how the old culture was and purposefully call out the things about the culture that weren't going to be successful as we go forward and define what we wanted the culture to look like. So I would say, as part of this, you want to think about the level of risk that your culture is able to take. And you want to be able to help people understand that managing risk better allows us to take more risk, and that we should be able to get better at defining resiliency and recover quickly so that we can take more risk and go faster. We need to no longer value the deep expertise, because expertise has a shorter and shorter half-life as things are changing. And instead, we want to look at how can we learn faster? How can we look for patterns? How can we experiment and fail fast and learn from that to go faster? We want to think about how do we use data in our decision-making process so that we can take out the opinion, take out the historic politics from decision-making so that we can look at data and go faster. And you don't always have the data to do it, but culturally you should say, what's the data that's going to support this decision? And if there isn't data, then you want to say, okay, how can I do an experiment, and how will I measure that and start to make progress rather than making a big decision. We no longer can have big planning cycles, because by the time we're done planning, things have changed. And we need to rethink what it is that we value. So purposefully defining that culture isn't enough, though. The leaders then have to model that. And Satya was brilliant about this. I'll give an example that went a bit viral within the company. How many of you heard about the bot that Microsoft was experimenting with about a year and a half ago? That it was a persona of a female teenager, and they were trying to learn on the internet, and a bunch of internet trolls fed it with data and taught the bot to be racist and mean and cruel, and it kind of blew up in Microsoft's face, and the press was going, oh my gosh, how could Microsoft let this happen? Whoever did this should be fired. This is an awful thing. So imagine you're the woman leading the team that is running this experiment, and everything's blowing up, and everybody in the press is talking about you, and your phone rings, and it's Satya. She told me that was a bit of a panic moment for her. But the first thing that Satya said, actually the first thing that he said was, "Are you okay?" just some empathy with the situation. And then he said, what did we learn? What are we going to do different next time? How are we going to make this better? He didn't say, how the heck could you let this happen? He didn't say, why didn't you have better control on it? He said, what did we learn? How are we going to go faster? And that story went viral within. I had her come speak to my team to tell my team the story so that I could get some of the leverage off of that, because we want people to feel like it's okay to experiment. It's okay to do things. Now, you also need to think about the resiliency and making sure that the critical things don't break, so that we don't want to be completely out of control, but you need something in your culture that helps you experiment and go fast. And start small and iterate, as opposed to planning everything out and trying to work against that plan. Just is not going to work. The third thing you have to do in resetting the culture is look at all of your reward and recognition system and make sure that you're recognizing those new behaviors. Because if you continue to recognize, the loudest voice in the room, as opposed to being inclusive of all the voices, if you continue to recognize the people or teams that never make a mistake, if you continue to recognize the overly risk-averse tendencies, you're not going to actually get the change that you want to have in the culture so that you can get things moving faster. So you have to be purposeful, you have to model it, you have to change, visibly all that it happens. And you don't have to be the CEO to do this. You can do it with your own team, you can drive that with your peers and management. But getting that culture changed, if you don't change the culture, the other stuff isn't going to matter, because your culture will hold you back. So the new definition of success. When I first went to all the business partners we have and said, I'm going to change how I'm going to reward my team. I'm not going to reward them anymore for delivering on time, on budget, A lot of them thought I was crazy, and a lot of them didn't want to work with that. But I found our marketing team was willing to say, yeah, let's work on a joint measure of success. And in fact, the marketing team came back and said, we want to measure our success and the success of anything we do with marketing automation with IT based on more high-quality leads. Just one simple metric. High quality, because low-quality leads goes to customer sat issues. You want high-quality leads, and of course you want more of them. So we started measuring our success within that part of my team based on when we released something, did it increase the quality and quantity of leads. And it did two things. First, it completely changed the empowerment for my team. So they stopped just responding to the requirements they were getting and being innovative themselves about what we could do. And we got to a point where we could trace a lead all the way through a sales opportunity to a sale and feed that data back into a machine learning model that was rating the quality of our leads. And we improved the quality of leads from that. Something that we never would have thought to do if we were just talking with the marketing team. We actually took that to a model that predicted success for opportunities, so the salespeople knew better where to focus. We took that into a machine learning model that actually drove our sales forecasting, that our CFO valued more than the one that was being done manually. So we stopped the sales force and sales management from doing sales forecasting anymore. And we built all the sales forecasting off of a machine learning model based on the quality of data. And it freed up the sales force to spend more time with customers and make sure that their opportunity data was quality, because it was feeding the forecast, as opposed to spending time creating forecasts off of that. Something we never would have done in the old model. So I said there was two things. One was the empowerment of my team to come up with ideas to help us get to that. The second thing that it did was it built trust from the marketing organization with my team. When we were being measured on the same thing, it changed our working relationship. We used to have these roles in between, the IT team and the business. There were relationship management type roles it was their job to go and figure out the requirements and bring them back to the IT team, and we'd come up with the design and we'd go get that signed off from the marketing team, and we'd come back and we'd build it. It was this iterative process that we no longer had time for. As we changed to working agile, we had subject matter experts from marketing working directly with my team in the daily stand-ups, and we shortened that interaction cycle. But it all came from the trust of measuring success the same way. And we got to completely using Agile across the board. We thought of a portfolio. I'll continue on the marketing theme, but the portfolio of everything applied towards marketing automation, we thought of as a product, and we had product owners that would drive that and work really towards that single definition of success. But looking at really getting agile was also a mind shift change that we had to do back to the culture points. We couldn't just, in fact, some of my teams were doing this at first. They would do little short waterfalls as opposed to really getting the whole mindset change to run in agile. Some of my teams also thought, yay, we're agile, we're free, we don't have to have schedules anymore, we don't have to do idle anymore, so we had to actually look at the processes that we were doing, because of course we still needed to have a clear vision of where we were going, that new definition of success. We had to have a view of the roadmap there. The difference is that we knew we were going to learn as we went, and we were going to update the roadmap and re-communicate when we learned something new, but we were always going to be working on the highest priority thing that would drive us towards that new version of success, as opposed to having a fixed plan that was getting stale. It was live and continually updated as we went, and the communication of that was even more important to everybody as we thought about the change through the process. We had to rethink all of our idle processes so that they would work in this manner. We still need to do change control, but it wasn't this rigorous change process. It was a recognition that we were doing agile releases, and all of those releases were logged and part of the process. So all of these things helped, but there was still friction in the system. So we had to look at what was creating the friction. And some of them were just the way our roles and hierarchies had been defined historically. So we had to rethink the roles. So as we started working with the marketing team closely and iterating, and their subject matter experts were participating in the sprints, what happened to the people that were in those relationship management roles? Well, they started trying to justify why they existed and what they were doing, and it was clogging up what we were trying to do going faster. So we had to reassign people in those roles to be the scrum masters and to be the product owners and change the roles. In fact, we looked across all of our roles and we tried to predict, as we went through this transformation, how's the organization going to look different? And we went back to all the teams transparently and we said, these kinds of roles, like the infrastructure operations roles, the people that are provisioning compute and storage, as we get to the cloud, those roles are going to go away or get a lot smaller. We're going to need more of, data scientists or security roles. So we kind of went through, we We purposely went through a role-by-role view to try to predict the future, and then we went back to the teams and said, if you're in one of these roles that's going to get a lot smaller, you either have to be the best, or we'll retrain you to all these other roles where we need people. So it was actually easy to take people in the relationship management roles and get them to be product owners or scrum masters as we talked about how it was going to change. The infrastructure operations roles, I actually closed open positions where we were recruiting for developers on the app teams, and I moved infrastructure operations people into those roles, and I tasked them with the automation of the provisioning that we were going to do in the cloud, because the app teams didn't know how to provision databases and storage and all that stuff the way, because the infrastructure teams had been doing that for them for years. And that automation took out more friction. In fact, as we migrated more and more to the cloud, we got to the point where we completely eliminated our pre-production environments by adding to our test automation at the very beginning the provisioning of the test environment. So step one, provision the test environment, load data if you needed, run the tests, turn it all off. So 0 persistent pre-production environments. They only spun up when a test was running. And that turned out that same automation could use when you were doing a release into production, because you had you tested the build of an environment. And it gave us a ton of friction. In fact, when we got to completing our cloud migration, which I'll say Microsoft is essentially complete on their internal systems moving to the cloud, because there's a couple that are left, but they're legacy systems that'll be retired in the next few months. And it was 60,000 VMs and petabytes of storage. It was a big environment that we migrated. But the agility that we got from doing that was the benefit. The cost savings were there. We actually saved significantly more than we had expected as we moved. And that's because we did things like not have persistent pre-production environments. We moved things to SaaS that we could. So the amount that was actually in our Azure instances was actually smaller than what we had originally planned. In fact, the cost of what we spent on our data centers, just the space power cooling, plus the savings that we had from an infrastructure operations perspective, just those two numbers together equaled our cloud spend when we were done. So all the compute and storage and everything was essentially free or savings as we migrated. But again, it was the agility that we got from moving everything that was the benefit, because we could move faster. A couple other things that we found from a friction perspective. Security was one. And this is basically as the cyber threats get more and more sophisticated, the security guys get more and more nervous. And if you hold them accountable for security, what are they going to do? They're going to slow everything down. So we had to change how teams thought about security. So the team that owned the marketing automation or owned the supply chain systems, they were accountable for their own security, which meant they wanted to work with the security team on how to do this. And it completely changed the working relationship between my teams and the security team. It was in fact, easier to recruit great security people into an environment where, they were wanted by all of the rest of the teams, as opposed to one where, security was slowing things down. But that was something that we found as friction. So go through everything that you run into that creates friction. The technical debt, we just made. As we were doing our releases or incremental releases from the sprints, We made sure that a part of every release was retiring some technical debt that over time has taken out the friction from the technical debt and legacy systems that we had. And we just attacked again and again all the things that were creating friction and didn't accept that they could slow us down. We said, okay, how can we take this friction out? And it was usually people that were slowing us down, but we started building the momentum with everybody because they could see the change. You know, starting with those that were willing first and bringing the rest along, but it made a huge difference when the people were on board to go faster, to learn faster, to drive based on data, to be inclusive of all the opinions, to get the best ideas, and really accelerate our pace of change. And I would just say, before we take a couple questions, that again, it doesn't have to be the CEO of a company that's driving this. It doesn't have to be your CIO if you're not the CIO. You can start it with your own team. You can start pushing things. You can bring your peers along. You can talk to your management and help make a difference to pull this along. And I would say that we really, if we're going to be successful in our companies, we don't have a choice. With the pace that things are going, we've got to change how we work and get real modern transformation happening.